as we followed him. And so as we're here, notice where we start. Let's start in chapter 11, verse 29. Abram, Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and Nahor's wife was Milcah, daughter of Haran, father of Milcah, and father of Iscah. Sarah was barren. Okay? Terah took his son Abraham, grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son's Abram's wife, and they went from the Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. All right, two things you're going to see here. Terah is headed to Canaan. He doesn't get there. He ends up in the city that's right between the two. If you look on my map, imagine a Bible map here. You've got what's called the Fertile Crescent, right? And there on this end, around where like Iraq, that area would be, and you don't go straight across because this is desert. And so all the civilization has gone over this hill, if you will imagine, this hump, and they go down to Egypt. Well, they leave. He's on his way to Canaan, but he stops right here in Haran, and that's where he's at. Now, what do we know about Terah? Nothing. We know about his children, but that's it. But we know that Terah had a son who died, and now he's got to take care of his grandson. And we know that he had a son named Abraham, or Abram at this time, and Sarai, but we know that Sarai is barren. So if you were to look at this man, Terah, from the perspective of his time, he is not a lucky guy. Things are not going well for him. You're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. Well, one of his children has died, and the other child cannot have children. And so, it's going to die out. Your family is very likely to die out. So he is not doing well. Most likely, he's either a shepherd or a merchant. That's the reason he's traveling this Fertile Crescent route. And that's where we are when we first began to meet Abram and first began hearing about him and the things about him. So Terah passes away, and when he passes away, then we open up one of the golden texts of the Old Testament, and that's chapter 12. God appears to Abram, and he says, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, look at verse 4. When Abram receives this promise, how old is he?
75.
He is 75 years old. All right. He is not a young puppy. Okay? Now, yes, we can point out, even after he has his son, Isaac, around the age of 100, 99 or so, he actually has another child at 120. So he's going to live a long time. But this is not a young teenager. This is not somebody who, has just started what we would think, okay, we're just about to start my career. Where am I going to live? This is a guy who's lived in the city most of his life, a guy who's probably fairly well established in his relationships, in his work. He is rooted. You know how some people will be in a certain place for a while and you have set down roots and it is hard to ever get away, right? That's Abram. God comes to him and he says, Abram, it's time to leave. You're going to leave your country, you're going to leave your family, and you're going to go to a place that you've never seen before. But I'm going to bless you, I'm going to give you a lot of land, and I am going to make you the father of many different nations. Now, did he tell Abraham where he was sending him? No. If I would, a lot of times I look back and think, man, it would be so cool to be Moses and, see the face of God, even from a blurry standpoint, to sit there and see the Ten Commandments being written, to see the Red Sea open. And sometimes I think, man, it'd be cool to be David, to take down that giant. The issue is Moses did not know how the story was going to end. David did not know how this. It's a really easy for Mark Ray here, in the year 2023, to look back and say, man, I wish I was that guy because I know how the story goes. He didn't know how the story was going to go. And very likely, many scholars think he probably had not truly met God yet. We don't know that he's a God-fearer. He's around an area that's full of idolatry, and we see he's going to have some issues with idolatry later. God calls him, and God says, follow me, and I'm going to take you. How did he appear? Was it a dream? Was it a vision? Was it an angel? We don't know. We just know God said, get up and go. Now, where's your faith? If God were to appear to you today and say, hey, leave your house, leave your car, leave, your parents or leave your children, if they're grown, just pick up who you got and just hop on the interstate and head west. How many of us would be into that? Some of us would be checking into a mental hospital first, right? Especially Sarah would be saying, Abraham, what in the world are you thinking? But Abraham heard God, and when he heard God, he went. He lived by faith, Hebrews 11, and it was accounted to him as unto righteousness, Romans chapter 4. And so here goes a man, and he is not perfect. Oh my goodness, he's not perfect. He has got all sorts of issues going on in his life. And so he goes along, and what you're going to notice is his relationship. When you look in Isaiah 41 verse 8, James 2:23, he is known to be a friend of God. Now, the handout sheet will spend some time talking about the difference between the covenant relationship and the friendship relationship. Those are kind of two different things. The covenant relationship, God says, I will give you this, and you will receive this. All right? It's like a business deal, except it's a one-sided business deal because God is the one who gives everything. The other aspect is this friendship with God. A person who walks with God, just as we see with Enoch, just as we see with Adam. And a lot of times you and I in our Christianity, we get the covenant part. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. We get that covenant part. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of righteousness. We focus on that covenant part. What does it mean? What does it mean to you to be a friend of God? How would you define that in today's world?
They're intimate.
All right? That very close relationship. There's not things that you hide from a friend, right? Okay. How else would you say?
Communication.
What'd you say, Brad?
Communication.
Okay, constant communication. And God was big on communicating with them. Hey, this is about to happen to Sodom and Gomorrah. Hey, this is going on here and there. God told Abraham what was up many times. But there was that openness. And I want us to, yes, focus on the covenantal aspect. We must be obedient to God in order to receive reward, those sort of things. But I also want to, as we think about Abraham, think about the relationship. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Share with God. Have that relationship with God. It is so very important.
Mark,
Yes, sir. What you got, Jim?
I have known members of the church that said the Bible does not teach a personal relationship with Christ.
Right.
Now, where they get that, I don't know. But, in other words, in their minds, it was solely a covenant relationship.
Right. Just saying, I'll get right back to that. Dan, what you got?
Somewhere in the Old or the New Testament, the Bible reads that God chose Abraham because he knew he would train his children after him. That's something that most of us don't do. Most of us let our children grow up. But he knew that Abraham would train his children.
Yeah.
And so it's a big plus. Like he says, that's why he chose Abraham. He knew the tradition would go on.
Right. He knew to pick Abraham because Abraham would train up his children. There is not discipline in the home the way there used to be. And I think every generation says that. But if you watch the news and see crazy things happening, whether it be schools or wherever else, whatever. You know what's missing from this equation? Parents. If these kids had parents who cared, all these vast majority of these problems would be done away with. But we're in a generation where the kid comes home, we give them an iPad or stick them in front of the TV. We're in a generation where we have no idea who our kids' friends are or what our kids think about life. And a lot of times our kids are crazy because they learn politics on social media. And they learn worldview on whatever else it may be. And everybody's teaching the kids except the parents. And you see the influence which is there. All right, what Jim just said is a lot of people will point out New Testament does not say anything about personal relationship with Jesus. It talks about covenant, but doesn't talk about the personal relationship. There's a history, I got to talk fast. All right, there's a history in the church of overreaction. Pentecostalism started about 1900, a little bit after that. And the whole focus of Pentecostalism oftentimes is on the Spirit. The Spirit is in this place. The Spirit moved me this. And because of that, many people in the Lord's church have, instead of a Trinity, they just have a duo. You know, the Holy Spirit's in the Bible, but we're not going to think about him. And we're not going to talk about him because that scares us and it gets us too close. I think that personal relationship thing's right there also, because a lot of denominations will say, you just have a personal relationship, just invite Jesus into your heart. And they teach wrongly in the plan of salvation or whatever else. And so therefore, sometimes we don't like that mushy side of it. And we like the rules, what we can see, and it's very concrete. And what I'm talking about when I talk about personal relationship is true love for God. If you never talk to someone, you don't love that person. If you don't seek to follow somebody, if you don't seek to follow God and really give yourself completely to him, then you don't have that personal relationship, which is what we're required to do. And so those are those two things there. Now, Abraham was a man who had some issues. And as we think about this man's issues as we go along, we're going to be on this back side, I think, on the back side of our page. Probably about the third paragraph or second paragraph. Abraham's life was a journey of faith. He traveled away from his family, his city, to an unknown future. He wasn't a young man, but along with his wife, he went and traveled and did things. Now, what's different if you look at old stories, mythologies, Odyssey, and Aeneid, and other things, the gods will set a guy up, a hero, and they'll send him out on his way. And he'll go, Helen of Troy or whatever, he'll go fight this battle. And he gets through this battle by his own abilities and everything else, and he comes back and then the gods judge him, remember? That's how most Greek mythology and also Mesopotamian mythology goes. God doesn't send Abraham, God goes with Abraham. And God has not sent you on a mission, God goes with you on a mission. And that's a huge change which is here. But man, did Abraham have some growing to do. Twice, Genesis 12, Genesis 20. Abraham is hanging out here in Egypt, and as he's in Egypt, because of the famine, he is doing fairly well financially. He's connected with some people. And Pharaoh, seeing the connections that Abraham has, and also seeing that Sarah is a really good-looking woman, says, hey, I'm going to take your sister for my wife. And what's Abraham say? Okay. Good timing there. Okay. This is good stuff. All right. Now, what man in his right mind would say, oh, just take my wife? No, well, not a good man, right? Why did Abraham do it? He was afraid they'd kill him. And he's like, okay, it's either me or my wife. Hey, I'll see you later, honey, Not good, and not following anything as far as faith in God. A man who left his home because of faith, a man who traveled because of faith, should have had the faith to send up to Pharaoh and say, no, she is my half-sister, but she is my wife. Pharaoh took her in. Suddenly, a lot of plagues. Things are not going well. And Pharaoh realizes he's done something wrong. He gives back the wife and says, what have you done? And Abram says, sorry, and then they go off on their way. Okay? Abram should have learned a story. 8 chapters later, here we are in Philistia. A Philistine king does the same thing, and Abram goes the same direction. And what we see here about Abraham, is a man of faith, a mountain of faith, which will be brought up over and over and over, not always perfect. And there are some times where that faith really wavered. They're promised the son. They wait 20 years. The son does not come yet. Do you have something you want to say? Yeah, go ahead.
It really rings a bell in my life and a lot of people's life is what you're telling me about Abraham. He's a really faithful person, but he didn't really do.
Yeah, he's a really faithful person, but there are times where there's moles and warts or whatever. It doesn't quite come across as well as it should. All right, we've waited, we've received the promise, it hasn't come. Sarah says, hey, all right, I love you, Abraham, but why don't you just marry my slave, have relations with her, and then we fixed God? That looks a lot like chapter 11, doesn't it? God said this, let's fix God. So Abram says, okay. All right, shouldn't have said okay, but he says, okay. He goes and has relations with Hagar, Ishmael. As soon as Ishmael's born, Sarah says, bad idea. I hate Hagar. I hate Ishmael. You've got to kick them out. God says, okay, but I want you to know I'm going to take care of Hagar and take care of Ishmael. Abraham was a man who was growing. He was a man who often fell and failed. And he was a man who God continued to work with to create into the person that he needed to be. And so I think we learn a lot of lessons about him in the way in which he matured, in the way in which he grew. And eventually, Sarah becomes pregnant and has a child. And that's the child of promise. That's Isaac. And we, Lord willing, next week we'll spend a lot of time on Isaac and the child of promise. Isaac's born. God has answered the promise. Now Isaac, probably about 15 years later, God comes back and says, listen, I've got a command for you, Abram. When you were a younger man, 75, I said to you, let's go and travel. Now here you are, 99. Now here you are, 115 maybe. Isaac, go sacrifice your son, your only son. We'll talk about that in a second. Go sacrifice him. What did Abraham say? He went and did it. And here they are heading up the mountain. And as they head up that mountain, the boy says, Dad, we got the wood. We got the fire. We didn't pick up the sheep. All right? God will provide. That's what Abram says. And they go up there. We see in Hebrews 11 that what Abraham's thinking in his mind is, I'm going to kill my son, and God is going to raise him from the dead. That's what he's thinking in his mind. So he gets up there on that mountain, and he wraps up Isaac, prepares him as he would a sacrifice, and as he raises the knife, an angel appears and does what? Stops his hand, and it says, look, there is a ram that's caught in the thicket. You're going to sacrifice that ram in place of your son. And so Abraham did that, and there we see the crowning achievement of faith on Abraham's part. Now, that is one of the first, clearest pictures we have of Jesus. Of course, Genesis 3:15 is showing us Jesus. Noah is showing us the salvation of the church through Jesus. But here we see something very significant. Take your son, your only son Isaac. That only son in Septuagint is the Greek phrase monogene. Yeah, you'd recognize that when you get to the New Testament, your only begotten son. Only two people in the Bible are called only begotten sons. Isaac and who else? Jesus, John 3:16. And so Abraham is reenacting, if you will, God. It's time for you to sacrifice your son. Will you do it? Abraham says yes. God says yes. As we go up the mountain, nobody really understands what's going on. People question it. God will provide. That's one of the names of Jesus. We get up on the mountain and we raise that knife, and the angels step in. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane prays, and the angels are there. And he could have called legions of angels, but Jesus did not. Those angels comforted, but they did not stand in the way. Over in the thicket, these thorns over here, centuries later, somebody would be wearing a crown of thorns, and who would that be? Be Jesus. And that ram was put to death in the place of Isaac. We see that Jesus, 2 Corinthians 5:21, was sacrificed for us. He made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we, through the righteousness of God, may be found pure in him. Now, 1 Corinthians 15 spends some time telling us about Abraham and Isaac, and he reminds us that in Isaac, how he came to death but found life. In the same way, we can see that resurrection of Jesus, and that resurrection of us as well. Yes, sir, Brad?
Always wondered if Mama was aware of what was going on.
Yeah. Did Sarah know what was going on? Or did she really want to whoop Abraham when he came home, you know? And we're not told. We're not told very much about what Sarah knew about this whole situation going on. She may have known. She may have been a person of faith fairly strongly, especially after she had this child. We don't know. But boy, if she didn't, when he came home telling stories, I bet Abraham, I bet he was watching TV on the couch for a while. That's for sure. Other places you see Abraham and his character. The time comes where he's so rich and Lot's so rich, they have so many cattle, sheep, that they're just cleaning the ground and they can't stay together. Abraham tells Lot, you pick where you're going, okay? Imagine if you had your nephew, and maybe you like your nephews. I like my nephews. But imagine you had your nephew that you had been feeding, that you had been taking care of, that you had been protecting all these years, and that nephew said, hey, I want more than you. I want you to suffer and me have more. How would you feel? Abraham said, you pick where you want to go. Lot decided he wanted to live on the outskirts of Sodom. But theoretically, at this time, this place was a very lush place. You could get rich quick here. You had the market, which was in Sodom. And we see where Lot pitched his tent towards Sodom. We see where he lives at the gate. And eventually we see where he is in the center of the city. And we see all the things that happen. After that man had wronged you by taking the best, Abraham hears that they're carried off into captivity. He builds an army of 120 men, and he goes and he rescues Lot and brings him back. Lot goes right back to the same place he was. He did not learn his lesson. 3 men appear to Abraham, and as Abraham is feeding them, they walk away and, they say, hey, we probably ought to talk to Abraham. He's our friend. The 2 come back, and as they come back, they say, Sodom's about to be destroyed. Abraham begins negotiating. What if there's 50 righteous? What if there's 30 righteous? What if there's 10 righteous? For 10 righteous people, God will restrain. Now think about this. You've got Lot and his wife, right? You've got his daughter, and his daughter seems to be engaged, right? And that daughter seems to be engaged. And you start adding up all these people, Abraham may have thought he made it by the time he got to 10. But Lot was not found righteous either. But he was saved, I think, because of his relationship with Abraham. But maybe he was righteous enough to be saved. We see where his soul was vexed when he was in Sodom. We see that in the book of Jude. And so we see that issue going on there. But what I want you to see is that Abraham, he is a righteous man. He takes care of other people. He fulfills responsibilities. He's a man of faith, but he's also a man who has difficulty. There's times where he does not quite live up to that perfect example that he wants to be. But now we pull ourselves back to the book of Galatians, the book of Romans, the book of James. And I want us to notice what God remembers. When you read in the New Testament, do you read of many of the sins of Abraham? Not so much. What do you read about? The faith. Okay? When God looks at me, the very first thing I think of when God sees me is whatever sin I committed last week, whatever shortcoming I have, wherever my struggle is. And I think God is looking at all the mistakes in my life and going, oh, there's that mark, and there's that mark, and there's that mark. Jesus didn't come to this world to condemn it. He came to this world to save it. And I'm not saying that Jesus overlooks sin, because he absolutely does not. Sin separates us from God, Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. But I am saying that our faith, our relationship, our friendship with God helps him to see us in a better light. God loves you. God cheers for you. And God longs for the day when we're able to be with him forever.